I wanted to take a little bit of time today to talk about something that's actually really, really near and dear to my heart, which is that we spend a ton of time worrying about our snare drums. And we also tune our toms and we try to get a good sound out of them. I really love toms, and I really love it when I hear a player whose complete kit sound tells me that that's who I'm listening to. And not just that their snare drum sounds great or that the kick drum is just pumping. We've got these toms, and they are an instrument unto themselves. And I really want people to get excited about getting into those drums the same way they do about their snare drum, their bass drum, their crazy ride cymbal that they paid $1,000 for. When I think about my favorite drummers, beyond just the sound of their sound of their kit really tells me who I'm listening to pretty quickly. Steve Gadd was the first person whose toms I really noticed when I was coming up. John Bonham's toms gave me a certain kind of feeling. When I finally got into jazz, Elvin's toms or Tony's toms were like, I know who that is immediately. And at this point in history now, the average gear that you can get for little money is extremely resonant and very well made. A lot of it is as good or better than some of the kits that those guys were playing on in the early days. And what that means for us is that getting a functional resonant sound is actually pretty easy, especially with a tom, because you don't have to worry about wires. And what that means, I think, is that a lot of people get a sound and they go, that sounds good, so we're done. When you listen to people that play hand percussion or people that come from a culture where drums are central to the culture, you can really hear the personality of that person through their instrument because that's the way that you learn the instrument. It's part of the culture. And the drum set, as it is sort of the 20th century North American percussion instrument. Steve Smith has talked a lot about this, and I agree with that. And what that means for us is that our voice is not just our playing. It's also not just the snare drum that we buy or how we tune it. It's the whole thing. It's how many toms you use. It's how you tune them. It's your choice of cymbals. It's the way that you hit those things. It's the kind of beater you put on your bass drum pedal. And all of these things, they grow out of the snare drum because that's the original kind of center of the drum set going back to the beginning of the century. Now we've got all this stuff, and neglecting any of it is just sort of a disservice to being able to get your personality out to people. And recently, some of the drummers in New York that I've been listening to have gone for much more unorthodox sounds, not just with their snare drum or bass drum, but also with their toms. I'm thinking of people all the way from Mark Giuliano, which a lot of people know. He goes through different sounds. I'm a big fan of Henry Cole. He has a really specific tuning scheme with a pitch pipe when he's on the road. It's intense. But at the same time, those are people that when they play, you're like, I know who that is right now, and they're speaking to me with their voice. The first thing I would say to do if you want to get into this is to upend the standard tuning scheme for toms that we're always told, which is nice feeling top head, bottom head a little bit higher. That's the par for the course thing. Some people will say tune them to the same pitch, but usually you hear comfy top head at the feel and the pitch that you want, and the bottom head between a half step, maybe as high as a fourth higher. The first thing I want to do today is the opposite of that, because when you tune the batter head to a comfy kind of soft pillowy feel, we can't do things like rim shots on the tom and get a good sound. We can't do things like flams also catching the rim, or soft things with articulation very, very low, because you're only going to hear overtones. So let's see what happens when we flip it around. This drum right now is tuned soft, comfy top, and about a minor third higher on the bottom. All right, here we go. I'm using the heads that were already on the drum. I'm not replacing anything right now. And to get sort of a true pitch out of each of them, I just left it on the stand, but I muted the opposite head while I was checking the pitch of each of them to make sure that I was hearing the head that I'm tuning and not part of the interaction. Now we have a batter head that's a fourth above, a perfect fourth above the resonant side. This is a really different sounding scenario that still works in a lot of situations, but it's real different than the thing that we just had. It's actually not that different pitch-wise from where it was before in terms of the overall sound of the drum, but we flipped the pitches of the heads, so now this head is tighter and it feels more articulate. It gives you tone at a much lower dynamic range, a much lower stick height. And it also affords us more options for sounds to get out of the drum that are going to carry to the audience. If we do a rim shot on a tom that has a very slack batter head, it's just going to be the sound of the rim. It's not actually going to make the shell resonate, which is where the beauty of a rim shot comes from. Just with this small adjustment, the whole behavior of the tom becomes different, and it gives you a little more dynamic range. It gives you a little more attack. It's maybe not the right thing for like a pop session or something like that, but if you're in a space where you can be creative, this is one of those things that I just kind of stumbled on because I had some time on my hands and I was like, I wonder if I can get more out of that rack tom than I'm getting right now. A great thing that I've seen Dave King do actually is play a 12, a 16, and an 18-inch bass drum. And what he did is he tunes his rack tom like this. It's in a bop range. It's up. It's kind of tight. It's very articulate. His bass drum is also in the bop range, kind of boomy, not a lot of muffling. And then the floor tom has pinstripe heads on the top and the bottom, tuned finger tight. And that means that he can use the vocabulary and the tones of jazz between his snare, his rack tom, and his floor tom, but he's got his like heavy metal bass drum in the floor tom instead of in the bass drum. And just that disorganization of the voices is enough to inspire new things. It also makes me think of Kenny Aronoff, whose toms are out of order. He plays the larger rack here and the smaller over there. Virgil Donati does that type of thing all the time. And beyond just organizing your drums differently, if you organize the tunings differently, it's really going to take you to a new place. Playing an instrument like the drum set is a little bit different than something like a piano or a guitar or a horn, because there is a much larger span of things we can do to our instrument to change the way it behaves. With a simple acoustic instrument like drums, you'd think you hit them and they make a sound. But there's this enormous opportunity for you to make your own voice, not just in what you're playing, but in the sound you're making when you're playing it. This goes all the way back to our first video when we talked about the snare drum. That applies to everything. What do you want to sound like? What does your music call for? What do you want to project when people call you for the gig? Because at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, they're hiring the person, not just the player. They want your personality and your sound. So don't be afraid to figure out what that is, and don't be afraid to break the rules and see what you find. You might find something amazing that'll make you the guy.